everybody, I'm the Drink Pro. Today I'm drinking the Weller Special Reserve and the Weller Antique 107. Hey everybody, Drink Pro here yet again. Thanks so much for joining me. I am so excited yet again to be doing part of my Weller video series. This is the fourth and final part, unless somebody can get me a sample of the Weller Single Barrel. If you've got the Weller Single Barrel and are willing to share it, hit me up because I will save a little bit of each of the samples I've tried so far just in case. Assuming that doesn't happen, I will be finishing this series with the Weller Antique 107 and the Weller Special Reserve. These are the most available of the Weller lineup. I've so far tried the CYPB Create Your Perfect Bourbon, the Weller 12 Year, and the Weller Full Proof. Now I'm going to put these here in order of their proof statement. Just like the Weller CYPB and the Weller 12 Year, the Weller Special Reserve is a 45% alcohol product. It's sitting at 90 proof. That does seem to be a sweet spot based on my tasting of the 12 and the CYPB. I really enjoyed them at that proof, so I understand why that would be done. The Weller Special Reserve, like I said, the most available, the most common, the lowest cost. We'll see if that translates to the lowest quality or not. I've also got a Weller Antique 107. Now, it's worth noting that this is a corked Weller Antique 107, which is a relatively new product. In the past, the Weller Antiques 107s were screw tops, like that. Oops, shit. I'm not reviewing this particular Antique 107 because it's a store pick, and I don't really want to compare the store picks with all these different Weller products. You might say, why not? Well, I've had a store pick of the Weller Full Proof that was much better, in my opinion, than the standard Weller Full Proof. And I want to provide you guys with an understanding of the standard products. Store picks are so dependent on the specific store and the pallets that go do the pick that it's really hard to say, oh yeah, this store pick is representative of the Weller line in any way, shape, or form. It's just not going to be because it's not being done by the tasters that make those products. Buffalo Trace actually has a set of tasters, and their whole job is to make sure that batch to batch, the Weller lineup and any other lineup made at Buffalo Trace is consistent. They want it to taste a specific way, and they make sure it continues to taste that way. Part of the joy of a store pick is that it's not going to fit that moniker. It's going to go outside of that profile, and that can be really exciting, but it's not informative the way I think this is designed to be, at least the way I want it to be. So, given that this is the final video, most likely, that I'll be doing on these Weller products, I want to give you a little bit more background about the man himself, William Larue Weller. Now, William Larue Weller actually died before the 1900s even began. He did have a small part in the creation of the Stitzel Weller distillery, but I think there's a much more fundamental contribution with which he's credited that we need to make clear here in these videos. William Larue Weller is arguably the first person to make the secondary grain in bourbon wheat instead of rye. What does that mean? Well, rye is usually going to be a spicier grain, and wheat really smooths out and sweetens up the profile. So he created a whole different style, arguably, of whiskey and of bourbon. That's a really fundamental contribution. Yes, he was a whiskey salesman, but to be the first person to do that, arguably, is a really cool thing. It's really worth celebrating, in fact. And I think that's what we're going to do today, for sure, is celebrate. Now, I've talked a lot about Buffalo Trace making these other Weller products and continuing to release them, but the two products that have consistently been released under the Weller name is the Weller Antique 107 and the Weller Special Reserve. There have been other releases in the past that I won't get into that have done some interesting different things, but these two really are the bread and butter of the Weller line. When people think of Weller, they're probably thinking of one of these two, or the William Larue Weller. I don't want to spend too much time with preamble. I've given you guys over these last videos a lot of information about William Larue Weller, about the Weller history, about the hype that is surrounding Weller products today. It's actually hard in Indiana to find even the Weller Special Reserve, and also the Weller Antique. A lot of times you can find those pretty regularly on the shelves in places like Texas or Ohio, but they're more difficult to find on the shelf in other states. Even when you do find them on the shelves, the Weller Antique is usually not going to be at MSRP. I know I don't think I paid MSRP for this particular bottle. So let's go ahead and pour these guys up. Before I forget, Big shout out Miranda Callahan for this sample of Weller Special Reserve. I appreciate it. I think this is really important to shout out, not just because Miranda's been a patron for a while and I really appreciate her support, but because I think a lot of people assume to be able to send me a bottle, it's got to be something crazy. You're going to have to send me, you know, some 1 ounce or 2 ounce sample of a $1,500, $2,000 bottle. I mean, I absolutely love it if you do. Please continue sending me that stuff. That would be freaking amazing. But I also am perfectly happy to review all kinds of other products. I've had some really cool products that I've discovered, in fact, from just reviewing things that you can find on the shelf. I appreciate everybody that sends me samples. That really is the reason I'm able to keep doing the show. It keeps this channel going. I've got a backlog of samples now, which is something I never in a million years imagined would happen. So thank you all so much for your generosity to keep this channel alive. Now I'm going to start with the Weller Special Reserve. It's a lower proof product, 45%. Those berries are so prominent. There's something about 45% that makes sense for these Weller products. You get tons of sweetness and creaminess and red berries. It reminds me of certain mash bills, the ones ending in O that have that red berry quality. That is what this smells like to me. That O yeast strain from Four Roses. Now this has a distinctly sweeter component. This is much more caramel and vanilla and corn syrup almost. It's incredibly sugary. It's almost sickly sweet. Raspberries and cherries. You know, there's not a lot else going on in this though. I gave you those notes and I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for an herbal quality. Maybe just this tiniest hint of geranium, but it's very, very subtle. There is not much herbal going on in this at all. I don't get a mint quality hardly at all. There's just no baking spice, no cinnamon, no nutmeg, no clove. Maybe a really, really, really tiny piece of tobacco. What I'm really seeing here is that all of the other interesting nuanced notes that I was getting from these other pours, they're all squished down in this particular pour. I think the Special Reserve, to get that low dollar figure, they're doing big vats, they're doing large quantities, they're blending together to make easy drinking, simple, smooth products. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's not going to be the nuance in this you're finding in these other products. Yeah, vanilla, caramel, red berry cereal. Those are the 4 notes that just keep coming up again and again and again. Maybe just a hint of almond, too. I mean, all of those notes that I'm finding in some of these other pours, particularly in the 12-year, are showing up in subtle, subtle components in this Special Reserve, but they're all very quiet. See, when something smells that sweet, I expect it to be that sweet on the palate, and this just isn't. Now, I get some interesting nuttiness in the mid-palate. Actually, on the finish, the mid-palate I get sort of this subtle woodiness, and then there's this lingering walnut almond quality on the finish. There is this sweet, oh, okay, it's in the mid-palate. So my initial taste, I got almost no sweetness right off the bat, but after a couple of tastes, I really start to see the sweet honey notes and the sweet malty notes in the mid-palate, which is interesting. First thing I taste is vanilla and grain, then right into this sweet caramel note. Then the woodiness shows up, disappears pretty quickly, and then you're back at it with this quiet background walnut pecan almond, but the finish is pretty short on that. So instead of jumping right into the Antique 107, I'm actually going to go through all the 95 proofers back to back to back, and then I'll go right into the 107, because I think it's important to compare apples to apples, and when you're at the same proof level, that's really important. So here we go. Now when I do them back to back to back like that, I think I actually prefer the CYPB, which is telling me something. I think the CYPB is really trying to fit a broader profile, and that's what the Weller Special Reserve is trying to do as well. These are broad profile whiskeys. And the CYPB seemed to take the sweetness that was on the nose of the Special Reserve and give it some body and give it this fruity quality on the palate and really give you a lot more of what you wanted from the Special Reserve. Even though on its own the Weller 12 seemed like such a perfect intermingling of the Weller Full Proof and the CYPB, when you line it up next to all three, the Weller 12 stands out as being different and not necessarily in a good way. If you like the sweetness, almost sickly sweetness on the nose of the Weller Special Reserve, and you like that really big honey mid-palate, then the CYPB is really going to be up your alley. All right, let's go ahead and taste the Weller 107 after tasting all three of those 95 proofers. Well, first I guess I should nose it, huh? This reminds me a lot more of the Full Proof. It's broader, it's sharper, it's sweeter. I will say I'm getting less of the citrus, although there is some citrus. I'm getting more of that sweet caramel vanilla note. The vanilla in this is still more vanilla bean, whereas the 114 full proof, I was getting that sharp vanilla extract. And the citrus note is less prominent than the caramel on the nose of the 107, whereas the 114, the full proof, I got that real sharp citrus note beyond the caramel. I'm actually getting a little bit of maple syrup on this 107. Again, that white chocolate note comes up. And because of that higher proof point and that increase in ethanol, that higher heat, I'm getting a little bit of black pepper on the nose. It's hard sometimes to distinguish between the barrel bitter on the nose and a barrel tannin note and the black pepper note on the nose. A lot of times they can be one and the same, but here this feels a lot more like black pepper. I think it's because of the narrowness and the quickness at which it comes and goes. Barrel tannins has a very specific sharpness to me that I'm not getting from black pepper. A lot of cinnamon on the nose of this. The 107 is full, jam-packed, full of cinnamon. I'm getting a sweet pipe tobacco too. If you've ever smoked pipe tobacco, sometimes they have these sweeteners added to get this really wonderful aromatic quality. I'm getting some of that on the nose of this. But yeah, still the same fruit notes, red berries, cherry, a little bit of green apple again, which is what I saw in the full proof. That apple quality doesn't show up as much at the lower proofs. At 107 proof, it's leaving a little bit of room for that herbal flower note to kind of show up again. I'm getting just a tiny touch of mint, and I'm getting a lot of rose petal actually. It blends together really well with that sweet vanilla caramel note, so it's really interesting. I'm amazed how consistent all these profiles are. They're very consistent flavors. It's just different levels on each one. It's where the volume is turned up and down. One thing that really stands out to me between the full proof and the 107 is the 107 does not have that woody note. There's no sharp barrel bitter. There's no distinct oakiness on the nose. It's turned up certainly from the 95 proof lineup, but it doesn't have the sharpness of the full proof. All right, let's give it a taste. It's got a bigger, broader flavor than the Special Reserve, but it still has that generic appeal component of the Special Reserve. It's still got super toned down flavor notes. Definitely a lot of that sweet vanilla and the caramel. There's an oakiness that shows up at the beginning, but it's not very strong. It's actually sort of the right level of oakiness compared to the full proof, in my opinion. I think that 107 has a better level of oak for blending with the rest of this pour in terms of how it should taste all together as one cohesive unit. I'm getting this bitter walnut on the mid palate too, which is kind of fun. Definitely getting like apple skins, which is a super weird note, but like there's this bitterness that comes with an apple skin. There's like a fruity bitter blend that I'm getting on the mid palate into the finish here. Finish is pretty classic. It's got a little bit of that pepper, hint of the woodiness, hints of the honey. I think the 107 is really interesting because it's showing up very much like a stronger version of the Special Reserve. And you can see that it's not trying to be too strong in any one direction. The 107 is a very balanced pour, but the differences are much more narrow. It's a much more basic pour than the Weller 12. I'm going to go through and taste them all again once more, but I think the Weller 12 is going to be my winner. After tasting all of them back to back to back, I think the Weller 12 just barely ekes out the 107. I think my lineup is Weller 12, 107, CYPB, Full Proof, Special Reserve. In that order. The Full Proof beats the Special Reserve only because if I have to choose between too narrow and too broad in terms of how it jolts me around as a pour, I go too broad instead. And that wood just feels tacked on, but it's interesting. It's more interesting than the Special Reserve, which is just like lulling you to sleep in a lullaby. The CYPB is super sweet and berry, which I love, but it's still too one-noted. I want a more nuanced pour, which is what I get from the Weller 12. Now, the OWA has the super sweetness of the Special Reserve, and it's got a lot of interesting characteristics. It's got the woodiness, it's got the fruitiness, it's got a lot going on. It's a close race between the OWA and the Weller 12, but I think I picked the Weller 12 because I feel like it's a more well-balanced pour. I feel like the OWA is, because it's 107, it's being very big and bassy and broad, but it's not as well balanced. It's like they haven't quite got everything in place. And that's more difficult to do, I do think, at a high proof. It's very hard to have all your ducks in a row and have all these different flavor notes feel like they're supposed to be there with a high proof whiskey. So I just don't think it's quite doing everything I want it to do, whereas the Weller 12 just fits perfectly and all of the components fit together just the way I want them to. I kind of expected to like the OWA better than the Weller 12, to be honest with you, because I do tend to like higher proof whiskeys, but it's a very close race, but I think that Weller 12 ekes it out in the end. Thanks everybody so much for watching. Please like and subscribe and consider joining the Patreon. I've just updated the benefits in July, and there's some really cool stuff coming in the near future that I hope you can be a part of. In the meantime, I'm going to finish up all these pours, and you keep drinking like professionals. Cheers.